Hello, everyone. Today I will be spoiling and reviewing Weapons. The film has received a lot of hype, and I must say, I think the film delivered. The film is about so many things and nothing at all, and I want to explore all the disparate threads the film touches on. So let's get into it. Alright, we have a runtime here of 2 hours and 8 minutes. Pretty good, and I definitely didn't feel that time moving while I was watching. Just completely engrossed, and that's what films are supposed to do. Just make you get into the story and only worry about what's happening in the story as it's happening. The writer and the director of the film is Zach Cregger, who wrote and directed the 2022 hit film The Barbarian, which was his feature film debut. Thus far, Cregger is on a legendary trajectory that will undoubtedly land him among the directing and writing greats. We also have cinematographer here, Larkin Seppel. Excuse me if I didn't pronounce that right, but he was also the cinematographer Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. One of the coolest things about this film was the effect where it appeared that a camera was added to a door or moving object to enhance the feeling of impending horror. And the cinematographer also had the difficult task of showing the same scenes multiple times from different perspectives, which what I felt was done extremely well because of certain shot choices. So shout out to Larkin Seppel, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, because he did a phenomenal job. And also to get back to Cregger, in a Hollywood Reporter interview, Cregger said that he was inspired to write the film after the death of his friend. Cregger was a member of the comedy troupe The Whitest Kids You Know, which was co-founded with Sam Brown, Timmy Williams, Darren Trumeter, and Trevor Moore. Presumably, the friend he was referring to is Trevor Moore, who died in a freak balcony accident in 2021. And to talk about the cast, we have an amazing cast here. Apparently, the film had to be completely recast during the strike. As many people know, the actors and the writers of Hollywood decided to strike. And Cregger talks about how anxious he was, but I genuinely feel like he came up with one of the best cast ever. All of them had chemistry. All of them did really well. And that also probably has something to do with the script itself and the directing. But let's just get into who's in this film. We have Julia Garner, who technically plays the protagonist, but there's so much depth added to the other characters that it feels that anyone could claim the role of protagonist here. It just gave so many of the billed actors opportunities to showcase their full range. I recently saw Julia Garner, of course, in the Fantastic Four First Steps, and she was in another horror film this year called Wolfman. She's just been booked and busy ever since her breakout role in Ozarks, the Netflix TV show, and so congrats to her. She's amazing. So we have also Amy Madigan. She plays I won't get into it right now, but she plays an amazing role. And quite frankly, I'm not that familiar with Amy Madigan, but I might do a retrospective on her because her acting in this film was just bar none. We also have Carrie Christopher. Carrie Christopher played the child in this show and in this movie, excuse me. And I just want to point out that child actors have a very difficult job because they're acting as children while at the same time not necessarily needing to act. And sometimes I realize that a lot of child actors do overact, and here Carrie just felt like a real child. Like everything about him felt legitimate and lived in, and I just want to shout out to him because I think he did a phenomenal job. Hopefully he turns out to be one of those kids in 20 and 30 years where we're like, and we knew he was going to be a big deal because we saw it in Weapons. And yeah, Carrie Christopher did a great job as a child actor. Josh Brolin, everybody knows my man, Josh Brolin, he also did a great job. I would actually say he had one of the more subdued performances, but again, everybody had a presence because of how the script was written and how they were directed. Austin Abrams, I know him from Euphoria, but he did a great job here as a junkie, and again, fully lived in experience. Alden Ehrenreich, oh my god, I cannot pronounce names. He also did a great job. Just fully enveloped the role of Paul. And then finally, Benedict Wong. Again, all of these actors really were able to show their full range. Benedict Wong was given a particularly difficult role. Basically, he had to play almost two different characters, and I think he just did a fantastic job. So I just want to go into this quote that that Cregger used to define how he was able to create this script. He uses Stephen King's quote that says, "You need to be a paleontologist and you're unearthing the dinosaur one bone at a time, but you don't need to know what the dinosaur is." And I really felt that as I was watching this film, and as I go through the plot of the film, I hope to be a reverse paleontologist and describe each bone of the film and how they fit into the larger picture. So without further ado, let's get into the plot. So I'm going to have a little bit of a caveat here. I'm going to recommend beyond anything that you actually watch this film before getting it spoiled. It is truly worth watching. I'm spoiling this film because I love discussing story plots and it excites me. So without further ado, let's get into it because there's a lot to discuss. The film is set in a series of overlapping vignettes that allow the perspective of one character at a time. The story begins with a girl named Lily narrating the events that happened in her town 2 years ago. 2 years ago, 17 kids in one classroom all woke up at 2:17 a.m. and left their homes. Only one student in the class remained, Alex Lilly. No one knows where they went or why they decided to leave, but the parents have decided to blame the classroom teacher, Justine Gandy. At a school meeting intended to address the concerns of parents before the school reopens a month after the disappearances, the parents of the missing children dismiss Justine's empathetic remarks and chase her to her car. We then get a title card that says Justine, and we get her perspective of the day. She's advised by a school administrator to go home immediately, but of course she doesn't do that and goes to the local liquor store. She's confronted by a junkie who asks her for money to buy him tickets to visit his brother. The junkie will be important to the story later. In the store, she buys 2 giant vodka liters, an indication that she has an alcohol issue. When she gets home, she turns on the TV and proceeds to drink. She hears a knock on the door and goes to investigate, but sees no one. However, she does see that her car has been vandalized and has "witch" written in red paint on the side. She has a dream that night that involves going to her class in the middle of the night and seeing all her students there with their heads down. Only Alex raises his head and he has this crazy exaggerated makeup on his face. She wakes up and tries to see if there's anyone in her home, only to get a frightening image of an old lady in makeup on her ceiling. Fortunately for now, it's only a dream. The next day, she goes to the police to report the car vandalized. She sees her old fling Paul at the station. Justine invites Paul for a drink, where Paul insists on only drinking a Coke. Paul warns Justine about her self-pitying ways and assures her that the whole town does not think she's a witch. Despite his protest, Paul wakes up hungover in Justine's bed the following morning. They drive Paul to the bar where he picks up his car. Justine then goes to the school and makes a case to Principal Marcus that she should be allowed to see Alex while on leave. He hints at Justine's prior issues with breaking boundaries between students and teachers. While her boundary breaking is clearly just attempts to comfort and make the lives of her students easier, it's clear that she doesn't understand how that could be misperceived and also go completely wrong. Later, we see Justine follow Alex home, where he's irate and tells her to leave him alone. Justine snoops anyway, knocking on the door of his home and ringing the doorbell. The home looks unkempt and unoccupied. Newspapers line the first floor windows. With no response, Justine decides to snoop and travel to the backyard. There is a space in the backyard where she's able to peer in and see Alex's parents sitting in a catatonic state on their couch with scars on their face. Justine immediately calls Marcus and requests a status check on Alex. She decides to stake the house out, but falls asleep in the middle of the night. The door of the house opens and Alex's mother comes out with scissors in her hand. She slowly comes to the car and stands over Justine. Alex's mom moves out of the screen and we only hear the back door open. Moments pass before we see scissors come to Justine's hair and snip. This scene caused one of the biggest reactions in the theater. It was so scary despite nothing scary happening. It was the mere possibility of danger and how that possibility was depicted that caused heightened heart rates. And everybody in the audience, I remember the hearing of the back door open, a huge gasp let out. Although, girl, I would never stake anywhere out. I would never be sleepy and be in a car without those doors being locked. Anyway, there was a lot of those moments in this film, and I think that's just how horror goes, but I always have those thoughts while watching horror films. Anyway, the next day, Justine goes to a gas station and is confronted by Archer, the father of a missing child. Archer accuses her of knowing something that could bring them closer to finding the disappeared children. They are interrupted when a bloody Marcus rushes to attack Justine. Archer helps and Justine is barely able to escape. So now we get Archer's storyline. Archer is the father of a missing boy, Matthew. He sleeps in his son's bed and obsessively watches the security recording of his son running out of the house. He is some kind of residential contractor, and he has been slipping up since the disappearance of his son. We see that he has to return red paint that was used to vandalize Justine's car, so we know that he was the one who perpetrated this vandalization. Before completing his errands, Archer stops by the police office office to get an update on the missing kids. The police chief is exasperated and convinced that they have exhausted all their resources. They have not. In my opinion, I'll talk about this after. They did not do thorough of enough job because these kids should have been done found. Anyway, Archer projects the trajectory of his son's run and determines that he needs to see the footage of another kid leaving their home. He goes to a fellow missing student's home where he's rebuffed by a mother played by Sarah Paxton, my child acting queen, and also wife of Weapons director Zach Kreger. Archer is insistent and waits until the husband comes home, and the husband is played by Justin Long, who of course has a major role in The Barbarian. Archer is able to use his son's and the other child's trajectory to find where they intersect, but he's unsure of where exactly the kids were going. That night, Archer has a dream where he's able to see himself sleep in his son's bed. He follows the signs that mirror his son's movements on the night he disappeared. When he returns to the house, he sees a giant AK-47 floating above the house with a digital clock that reads 2:17 a.m. And now we go to Paul. In Paul's perspective, we learn that Paul has issues with alcohol as well. His fiancée is out of town for work and advises him to attend an AA meeting while she is away, and also to have Paul inform his boss/father-in-law that they will be in attendance for a Sunday anniversary lunch. And I think it's implied that Paul is not necessarily married yet to Donna, who's his fiance, but they're close and clearly because they're to be wed. That his boss is essentially his father-in-law. Paul awkwardly lets his father-in-law know about the couple's availability and then proceeds to patrol the town. He notices a junkie trying to get into a building. Paul successfully tackles the junkie and apprehends him. Before doing a body search, Paul asks the junkie if there's anything sharp on his person. The junkie forgot to mention that a needle is in his pocket, and upon pricking Paul immediately knocks the junkie out. Paul is concerned about contracting a disease or being severely impaired by any trace amount of drugs getting into his system. Paul then realizes that his car camera recorded the entire incident, and that could get him in trouble. He unplugs the camera's power source and lets the junkie go off on a quid pro quo basis. Essentially, I'll let you off, but you don't tell anybody that I just smacked you upside the head. Back at the office, Paul lets his father-in-law know about the situation, and his father-in-law says he should be fine as long as the citizen doesn't make a complaint within a month. And now we get James' perspective. James is the junkie we've been seeing throughout the film. These scenes especially highlight the quality of the writing, since these quote-unquote small characters feel like main characters when they are the protagonists within their little title cards. James wakes up in a tent in the middle of the forest where he's running low on what I presume to be heroin. He makes his way into town where he tries to see which doors are unlocked to acquire goods that he could sell at the pawn shop. When he's unable to sell his pilfered child's toy, he tries to go into a business but is apprehended by Paul. We get to see the police brutality scene again, but this time from James' perspective, and then we see James proceed to find shelter from rain during a storm. He lands on the Alex Lilly house where he enters from the second floor. James collects his loot, but finds the catatonic parents and the children in the basement. He's barely able to escape and immediately tries to cash in on the $50,000 reward for any tip on the missing children. On his way to report his tip, he encounters Paul, who arrests him again, but James tells Paul about the kids, and Paul goes to investigate. There's also this really funny scene where James is hiding in his tent and he sees the image of Aunt Gladys, but instead of hitting Aunt Gladys because he thinks the person opening his tent is Aunt Gladys, he actually just stabs Paul in the face with 3 heroin needles. And clearly, again, we see Paul freak out. Anyway, they decide to both go to the Alex Lilly house, but Paul never ends up leaving until later that night he comes out in a zombie state and drags James into the home. Then we get Marcus's perspective. Marcus is played by Benedict Wong, and he is, I presume, the principal of the elementary school. So, he's on the phone with Justine while grocery shopping with his partner. We see, despite being at his youngest in the mid-40s, Marcus is choosing flavors of calorie-dense processed food while talking to Justine. The film is definitely trying to point out that Marcus has food consumption issues. In his conversations with Justine, Marcus agrees to call Alex's parents to the school so that he can assure Alex's safety. The following day, Alex's flamboyant Aunt Gladys comes in Alex's parents' stead. Marcus is off-put by her appearance and weak explanation for why Alex's parents can't come to the school. Marcus insists on meeting Alex's parents, and the meeting ends. However, While Marcus prepares to watch TV and eat 6 hot dogs with his husband, Gladys knocks on the door and asks for some water. She asks for the water in a bowl and then proceeds to cut a piece of Marcus's partner's hair. Before the police are called, Gladys snaps a branch and Marcus begins to attack his partner. This is one of the most brutal scenes in the film, where we see Marcus smash his partner's head in. The film lingers on the disfigured head of Marcus' partner before he's summoned by Gladys to attack Justine. As we saw before, Justine is attacked at the gas station and is saved by Archer, who suffers from a hand injury. Justine waits for Archer at the hospital, and Archer reveals that Marcus ran the same way his son ran when he disappeared. Archer shows Justine the map showing the trajectory of the children, and Justine immediately identifies their destination as the Alex Lilly house. They go to the house, where they eventually gain the courage to enter, which they really shouldn't have. There's so many moments where it's like, people need to call more people for backup. I understand y'all think you're big dogs, but if you really think that this house has something nefarious going on, y'all need to highlight, you need to call big squads. You need to call the big folks, not just going there by yourself. And then we finally see the perspective of Alex, the only surviving kid. The film ends with Alex's perspective. We see that he has loving and attentive parents. Alex gets bullied at school, particularly by Archer's son, Michael. Alex's parents are preparing to host Alex's great aunt at their home because she's sick. At first, the appearance of the aunt seems normal enough, but Alex catches a glimpse of his great aunt sleeping, and her eyes are wide open. She brings to the home a small bonsai tree that has black branches and leaves. Upon arriving home after school, Alex finds his parents in a zombie-like state. In order to keep Alex quiet, Aunt Gladys makes Alex's parents stab themselves in the face with a fork. Alex, after seeing this performance, agrees to keep quiet. Aunt Gladys also tells Alex that she needs him to feed his parents some soup. We see images of Alex going to the grocery store and buying a bunch of soups cans. After a couple of days, Aunt Gladys states that she thought Alex's parents would be sufficient to sustain her, but they're not. She asks Alex to bring home items that belong to all the children in his classroom. Gladys says once she has these items, she will leave. The next day, Alex is almost caught by Justine, who asks Alex if he has anything to tell her, but he refuses and leaves the school while the fellow classmates name tags. Again, we see at 2:17 the next morning, the children are summoned to his house, and for the past month, Alex has been feeding his parents and the missing children while keeping quiet to any other adults to protect his parents. The big question I have for this whole entire thing was like, why was no one skeptical about this kid collecting a bunch of soup cans? Now, I remember being a kid, and I don't know if y'all know this, but box tops, those were things, so maybe that's what they were thinking. They thought he was getting some box tops, but after like the third week of a boy coming in every 2 to 3 times a week, getting a bunch of soup cans, I would have been like, someone needs to call this boy because he cannot be surviving off of soup. He needs some real vegetables and fruits in his diet. Anyway, we get a montage of how Aunt Gladys was able to redirect the detectives on the case and even initially have a meeting with Alex's zombied father at the school. Throughout this time, Alex has become familiar with his ritual. When Justine and Archer come into the home, they are immediately attacked by Paul and James. A grotesque scene includes Justine using a vegetable peeler to carve Paul's face, and everybody in the audience, okay, all the women, a lot of the men were staring, but it was gross, but a lot of the women were literally shrieking in the theater because it was so gross. She's eventually able to get she's eventually able to get at Paul's gun and shoot Paul and help Archer by killing James. Archer tries to find his son in the basement, but is caught by Gladys, who puts a spell on Archer and makes him attack Justine. In the meantime, Alex is running from his parents, but he uses Gladys's wig to get her hair, casts a spell, and makes the children attack Gladys. This is one of the most satisfying scenes in a film I've ever seen. Gladys immediately knows what has happened and leaves the house while the horde of children follow her by breaking through windows and crushing gardens. The children eventually find her and literally rip her apart. After they're done, they stand still in a circle. Archer is released from his spell and runs to find his son, Matthew. Justine finds Alex hugging his parents who are still in the zombie state. The film ends with Archer carrying his son back home. The narrator from the beginning of the film returns to say that the town buried the story because of the embarrassment they have about the series of events. Alex's parents were sent somewhere where they are still fed by others. Alex now lives with another aunt, and from what we know, he's happy. The kids have returned to their families, and some have even started to speak again. The end. All right, so this is my little review, and there's a lot to talk about, especially if you read anything about what Zach Cregger says about the film, which is really insightful. The film was just an absolute joy to watch from beginning to end. Every element from production and sound design to cinematography, editing, and acting, and cast chemistry was pristine. Many people have stated that the film is about nothing, but I think the film is about many things. It just prioritizes clean storytelling over contrived allegories and symbolism. Aunt Gladys is an old entity that weaponizes children to keep herself alive, and we get this idea that she's extremely old because she talks about her Alex's parents being sick with consumption, and Marcus, played by Benedict Wong, immediately clocks that and is like, "You mean like tuberculosis?" While Gladys feeds off the children, the adults cannibalize each other to find someone to blame for the children's disappearance, but no one ever identifies the real rich until it's too late. Ultimately, it is the children who have to save themselves. This is, of course, representative of a lot of human strife throughout history. Whenever there are issues, adults tend to find scapegoats that have nothing to do with the source issue. Even when there is a viable solution, like, I don't know, thoroughly searching the Alex Lilly home, people want to find the most sensational answer to their problem, like calling Justine Gandy a witch. If the adults were competent, they would have definitely found those children within a week. But every time someone comes close to discovering the children, they are stymied by their own vices. Paul has lingering anger issues, which causes him to be reticent about his interactions with James. Had he informed the station about apprehending James and then having a lead about the missing children, there may have been backup who could monitor the interaction at the house and immediately understood what was happening and got the children out of there. Nolan believes James tipped because he has drug issues. Marcus doesn't believe Justine because of her alcohol and past boundary pushing incidents, and Marcus is unable to further investigate because of his preconceived notions about Alex's welfare. As a principal, he wasn't even aware that Alex was being bullied, and while boys will definitely be boys, knowing that fact would have been maybe helpful in investigating Alex further to see how his home life is going. It's only Alex, the child, who is able to make the decision that saves everyone. The story also touches upon the vices of adults and how that impairs judgment. All the adults in this movie have vices that impair how they navigate life. Justine and Paul have alcohol and relationship issues. Paul clearly is not able to remain loyal to his partner Donna. Archer has anger issues and is not addressing the trauma from the disappearance of his son. James is a drug addict. Marcus has food consumption issues. And of course, Gladys is just an old witch. The film may also be commenting on how children are better poised to solve the issues of the world because they are not impaired as adults when it comes to their vices. In the Hollywood Reporter interview, Cregger talks about his personal family relationship to alcoholism. He mentions that alcoholism in the household with children reverses the roles, which is why we see Alex feeding his parents and the children while they're under the spell. So it's this idea that once your child or once a parent becomes addicted to a substance, they kind of become a different person. It's almost like an entity comes into the home, takes over your parent, and now you as a child has to raise your child parent. And Cregger talks about how he saw his father become an alcoholic as he was a child, and that kind of caused a role reversal. Moreover, there's something to be said about the weaponization of children and adults in the story and how they lose their voice. In the closing scene of the film, there's a commentary about the children learning how to speak again. It speaks to how when we are subsumed in another person's ideology and narrative, we lose ourselves, and it can take time before we find our voices again. One major plot hole that, and this is really not serious at all, is like, how did no other house cameras catch the bunch of children passing the house that passing through the street that is perpendicular to the Lilly home? Certainly most people would have noticed that, like, their cameras were all activated at one time at the night, and they could have easily identified that all these kids were going to the Alex Lilly home. Again, not a big deal because I was completely enraptured by the film. Again, major props to the cinematography, because that was bar none when it comes to the ability to make horror real without necessarily need to indulge in like these really grotesque scenes, which I think sometimes horror films do in order to compensate for a lack of storytelling. But that definitely wasn't needed here. The storytelling here was immaculate. And that's all I really have to say about Weapons. You really should watch this. If you watch this entire video without watching the film, shame on you, because this is a film that is really worth watching blind, and I might even watch it again. But tell me what moments stood out to you, because this was a great film. I'd love to discuss this further with anybody else who's watched it. And until next time, this was Strategic Delusion. Have a great day.